Brilliant. And for those of you that may have just missed that introduction, this forms part of our series of workshops on childhood neurodiversity. This specific workshop is around planning, organising and remembering. I'm Dr Hope Westgate, clinical psychologist in the team, and Dr Emmeline Gaspari is also presenting today with myself. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to take you through a little bit about what we're expected to cover today. So we've got around 90 minutes, so we'll be finishing around 2:30. So we're going to cover what we mean by executive function, differences that may exist for neurodivergent children. So that will kind of form the first half of today's presentation, which I will lead on. And then Emmeline will lead on the second half, which is around supporting executive functioning skills, supporting planning, organising and memory. We've also got some information on advice for schools for those of you that have children that are currently in education provision. And we've also got lots of resources to cover at the end. We know that for some people, kind of a 90-minute session is not going to be quite enough for you. So that's absolutely fine. Hopefully you'll be able to look at some of the places we're signposting to and resources, and that will provide you with a bit of that extra information. The other thing to say is this workshop today is packed with information. We've tried to pace it as best as we can, but we've also wanted to put a kind of some really helpful information in there for you to take away today. But it's completely understandable if some of that information is hard to kind of keep up with, or you don't remember everything. So we are recording this, so you can look back at the recording, you'll be able to pause that, and we're also going to send you the slides, so you don't need to feel like you need to keep up with everything that's being said, because you will have all of this information yourself. Okay. So I think that's it. So we'll go on to today's content. So we want to start today with a model that we've referred to many times in our series. And this is a model which has been kind of developed by Dan Siegel. He's an American psychiatrist, and he's come up with this analogy of the brain house. So we can think about our brain like a house, and it has an upstairs and a downstairs part to it. So the upstairs part of our brain is like the control tower. So it's that part of the brain which does all of those fantastic skills that make us human. So things like paying attention, problem solving, planning, and those skills can be kind of widely grouped together as executive functions. Now, this upstairs part of the brain is largely within the prefrontal cortex. So that's kind of this part of our brain right at the front of our heads. Now, the downstairs part of our brain is more about the emotion center. So that's where our alarm system exists. A particular part of the brain, which is really important for that, is called the amygdala. Now, that part of the brain has a responsibility to keep us safe from danger. And so it's responsible for triggering that fight, flight, or freeze response in our bodies, which gives us the best chance of keeping ourselves safe when danger is around. So that emotion center, that part, downstairs part of the brain, is also really crucial for us. So we need both that upstairs part of the brain for those high level thinking skills, and that downstairs part of the brain for our emotions, which are also really important and valuable. Generally, when people are feeling quite calm, relaxed, stable, that upstairs and downstairs part of the brain can work really well together. So you can see in this diagram that we've got on the right that there's stairs linking the upstairs brain to the downstairs part of the brain. So that means that messages can be sent between them. So for example, it may be that we experience an emotion, and that upstairs part of our brain can help us understand and make sense what that emotion is, and our skills that we have to kind of regulate or make decisions or make plans. But what can sometimes happen is when we have really big feelings, like anxiety, stress, anger, that can become overwhelming and actually take charge. So when those big feelings come up, what can sometimes happen is the upstairs brain actually goes completely offline. So all of the attention and effort is in that downstairs part of the brain to keep us safe. So when there's any kind of perceived threat and emotions get really intense, the upstairs brain kind of goes completely offline. And that's what's sometimes referred to as flipping the lid. So if we remember that upstairs brain is important for kind of planning, problem solving, it's that control tower. So when those emotions do erupt and that upstairs brain goes offline, it can be really difficult to think clearly, reason, to problem solve, to plan. So this can happen with any of us, but we'll be thinking about this a little bit more as we go along, because we know that flipping the lid can happen more often in young people, and also neurodivergent young people as well. So some children may spend more time in their downstairs brain when things feel overwhelming, but with support, they can learn to feel regulated again. So what is executive function? We've mentioned it a couple of times already. It refers to a group of high-level skills that our upstairs thinking brain uses to help manage ourselves. So it's important for setting goals, making plans, achieving those goals and plans, giving a sense of feeling under control. And actually, various different cognitive skills are considered part of executive function. So within this workshop, we're going to be going through each of those on the screen right now in a bit more detail with some examples, but we're just providing a really brief summary now, just so everyone knows what we're referring to. So inhibition, that's the ability to control our thoughts and behaviour. So it's about inhibiting or holding back impulses. It may be thinking before we act. Attention refers to our focus of our thoughts and behaviour. So it's around what we pay attention to, how long we're paying attention, being able to pay attention to multiple things at once, like paying attention despite distraction or boredom or feeling tired. Emotional control or emotion regulation is responding to and making sense of our emotions that are detected and generated in the downstairs emotional brain in a controlled way. So it's not about not feeling emotions, and that's really important to state. So we know that those emotions are really important. We don't want to ignore them. But it's more about being able to notice those emotions, make sense of them, potentially use strategies to use them in a more helpful way, tolerate them or manage them. Initiation is around starting something. So, for example, starting a task and being able to do that without procrastination. Working memory is not just purely about memory itself and remembering information like what you had for dinner last night, but being able to keep that information in mind, use that information to complete a task. So as an example, children may be using their working memory in the classroom every day when they're holding in mind what the teacher has asked them to do, what order they need to do it, maybe where the equipment is that they need to do that task for. Planning simply refers to being able to see that bigger picture, so understanding what it is we need to do and what we need to do to get there. So thinking about that series of steps to complete the task. So these set of cognitive skills are really important for everyday tasks. So that applies to tasks that your children are doing at home, things that they're doing at school. We are using the most moments of the day. And actually, they're even important for things like speech or gaze. So these are really crucial skills. But those skills don't always come naturally, especially under stress, if we're feeling tired, exhausted, for people experiencing sensory overload. And actually, many people do need support to access them. So just a kind of quick reflective question here, something for you to think about as parents or carers. How often are you able to use all of those skills all of the time? So able to do things like fully concentrate and attend to the moment, kind of be super organized, do that planning, feeling kind of calm, not acting on impulses, holding in mind information whilst doing a task. So how often do you think you can do those things all of the time? I imagine that the answer for most people is you're not able to do those things all of the time, or not very often. I certainly aren't able to do those things all of the time. So I guess this just makes the point that executive functioning is difficult. So skills like paying attention, keeping things in our working memory, keeping calm, being organised, doing all those things every day, all of the time is really hard for anyone. And actually, especially in our modern world, where there's so many things that can distract us. So today, when we're talking about supporting executive functions, just remember that there isn't any such thing as a perfect executive function, but there are ways of helping make these skills a little bit easier so that we can do those day-to-day tasks and supporting young people to do that. The other important thing just to hold in mind is that upstairs thinking brain, that prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for those executive functions, is not actually developed until people reach about 25. So actually for children, for young people, those skills are still very much in development. Their brain is still maturing and it won't fully get there to 25. So of course we expect there to be some kind of challenges in these areas. So some children do find these skills especially hard to access in the moment, and support and safety is really what makes the difference to help children get there. So this is just a quote by Paula Moraine, which reflects something that we've just said there. So executive functions are complex capacities for everyone, and it is unrealistic to expect that anyone can master these functions without some help. So that's just something to hold in mind. Okay, so we've got a bit more information in these next couple of slides. So we've established that executive function is difficult. It doesn't develop until children reach around the age of 25. Also, research shows that neurodivergent children are more likely to have differences in this area. So what may we notice if executive functioning challenges or differences are showing up in your children? So we're going to go through each kind of skill and think about that a bit more. So in terms of inhibition, maybe that some children may act kind of impulsively or quickly without much consideration of the consequences. And this can often be driven by emotions. So for example, more likely to happen if someone's feeling tired or overwhelmed. They may struggle to hold back hurtful comments, interrupt conversations, perhaps without waiting their turn. It could be that you're seeing them make impulsive decisions, for example, in group tasks. They may do things without consulting other people. It could be that you see them engaging in activities that we may not deem as safe, potentially due to kind of acting on impulses. So we know that these differences are more likely to be seen in neurodivergent young people. Around attention. So some people may find it harder to focus and become more easily distracted. So in terms of distractions, we can think about external distractions and internal distractions. So external distractions are things that come from outside of a person. So we can think about the 5 senses in terms of those external distractions. So there may be distractions in terms of our vision. So for example, if someone's outside and there's lots of bugs around, that in itself could be very distracting. It may be that noises can cause distraction. It could be that for some people, actually just kind of touch is being distracting. So if people are kind of particularly sensitive to certain feels, for example, if a shirt feels quite scratchy to them, it may be that smell is a source of distraction. So we could walk past someone that has a really strong perfume. It may be a taste. So if there's any kind of lingering tastes in the mouth, that could be a distraction. There's also internal ones. So they're things that come from within the brain and can often be caused by brain becoming a bit exhausted. So internal distractions can be things like our own thoughts. It may be interests or obsessions. It may be memories, so kind of our own brain thinking through memories of what's happened before or thinking through things that we've seen in a film. It may be our own questions or wanderings in our mind. So there's lots of different sources of distractions that may exist and make it really hard to focus for some young people. So some young people may struggle to remain on task and follow the instructions. And it could be that they're making more errors because of kind of just missing out information. And we know that attention and skills around this are a core component of ADHD. And while some people with autism may also really struggle with attention, they also may actually be kind of really hyper-focused with their attention on certain tasks or activities, especially if it's linked to interests. Okay, around emotional control. So if someone's struggling in this area, they may be more likely to become overwhelmed. They may swing between kind of high moods and low moods, so kind of really high levels of excitement to actually kind of being really withdrawn or really struggling in their mood. Sometimes that can be related to not being able to recognize the emotions in the first place. And of course, if we can't recognize the emotion, it is going to feel more intense and we're going to have less control over it. So for people where this is true, they may need more support and able to manage those. If someone is struggling with initiation, they may need more support in starting activities. So they may find it more difficult to remain engaged in a task. Also may need more support in actually asking for help in the first place. So this can make things like time management or planning quite difficult. And differences in this area are more likely to show up for those who are neurodivergent. Working memory, so those with differences in this area may not be able to recall information completely. They may need more prompts to retrieve information. Also difficulties with following instructions. It may be noticed that they're losing track of their place. For example, when reading things through, they may be frequently losing track of where they are. And it is noted in research that working memory is found to be a particular challenge in those who have ADHD, and that includes both for verbal information, so what's being spoken, and also visual information, so what we can see. And finally, thinking about planning and differences that may present in terms of planning. So maybe the young people are finding it more difficult to be organised, struggling to complete tasks until the end and see it through, finding it difficult to kind of really plan ahead and make decisions. We do know also for autistic young people that sense of order and predictability can be really important, and that kind of planning. But also any changes to that can also result in emotional overwhelm. So I'm mindful that I've just gone through loads of information there. As we said, we'll kind of be sending you some of that specific information in the slide. But let's just have a moment to think about some of this for your young people that you've come here for today. So what kind of differences have you noticed in their executive functioning? It may be kind of challenges or strengths that you've noticed in your child around those areas. It may be areas that I haven't quite noticed in that slide. So there may be other things that you think is really important for your child. But this is just a chance that anyone just kind of type some things in here about what you've noticed in your child with regard to some of those skills. So we'll just have a few moments to kind of see what people are sharing. And this is a word cloud, so what people are saying more frequently is going to come up larger. So we've got lots of things here. So people are saying all of the previous two slides, so it may feel like lots of that feels really relevant to your child. Yeah, noticing things like fluctuating mood, emotional processing and regulation feels really important to some people. Highlighted here, we've got impulsivity and poor planning alongside that kind of emotion regulation. Some people are saying no consistency, unwillingness, slow processing, which we haven't explicitly touched on as well, but yet some people may actually take longer to process information, they need more time. Thank you, we've got so many thoughts coming up here, I won't be able to do justice to all of them, but hopefully you can have a little read through of what other people are saying and actually see how many people are noticing the same thing. So poor working memory, struggling to remember what's happened in the days, outbursts, which may be related to those difficulties with regulating emotion, working memory affected by small distractions, trouble taking turns, slow. People are kind of noticing that there are strengths as well. It's really important to kind of notice that balance, that you may be noticing strengths. struggles to get homework organised. Yeah, that can be really challenging. And I guess the kind of expectations that may be there may not always feel realistic for your young person, given some of the things that they're experiencing. Someone said not able to communicate feelings, which is really important. So we've said that sometimes people may not be able to recognise what they're feeling, but also importantly, they then also may not be able to kind of communicate or put that into words, which is of course going to make it feel quite strong. Someone says sleep issues as well. Again, not something that we've talked about yet. And we do have separate workshops that we can refer you to on sleep. But we also know that sleep is hugely important for those executive function skills that we've talked about. So actually, if someone's having difficulties at sleep, of course, that is going to have an effect on the executive function skills. So thank you for putting that. That's why it's so helpful to get feedback from you guys, just as a reminder about all of the different areas it can affect. Okay, I'm going to move along, but just to say again, all of these responses get saved and we ourselves can look back at them as well.
Can I just say participation on Slido is amazing today?
Yeah, really helpful. So how does this impact your child at home and at school? So we know it is inevitably going to impact them in various ways, but what we're looking here is how specifically for you and your young person is it impacting at home and school? And so this is a bit of a space to reflect on that. Bullied at school, okay, that's sad to hear. So it may be leading to some of those negative experiences. Late for school, difficulties with homework, feeling left out, unhappiness. So yeah, we've kind of linked that to some of the emotional outbursts that can really impact on mood, and self-esteem, I guess, that sense of self that develops as well. Feeling of overwhelm, absolutely. Late to school, yeah, so kind of if you think about all of the executive functions actually just needed to prepare for the school day, so I guess that can make it really hard to get to school on time and to be prepared and have that bag packed. Not being able to complete tasks, not being able to enjoy school because of all of the expectations, yeah. Perhaps relying on yourself as a parent for regulation, and actually when you're not there, that's really difficult. Comments from other children, constant battle, yeah. So it can feel really difficult for a parent as well, as what I'm seeing in some of these comments. So it's impacting on your child at home and school, but that actually also impacts on you as a family system and as a parent to see your young person struggling in that way as well. Yeah, struggling to enjoy parent-child time, yeah. Struggles to concentrate, fidgets, makes noises, at home very emotional, can't think to use the toilet or have a drink before leaving the house. Yeah, so it may be that your children are needing lots and lots of support, lots of prompts, just for those everyday tasks like brushing teeth, getting dressed. So that creates kind of lots of exhaustion, I imagine, in parents and the young person themselves. We are going to have to kind of move on in the essence of time, but thank you for kind of thinking through. And I guess what you may be seeing as you're watching a lot of these responses come up as a parent and carer is how crucial this area is, how much it can have impact on the everyday, and how important it is to kind of support our children with these skills. Thank you. So just one more slide before we go on to more information. There was some mention of strengths, but we just want to take a moment to acknowledge any strengths you do notice in your child's executive function skills. Again, it may be related to the areas we discussed. It may be something else, some other kind of cognitive skill that you think fits there. Kind of what strengths do your child have? Does your child have around these areas? Okay. So lovely, we've got lots coming up here. So empathy. So yeah, they may be kind of actually quite sensitive to the emotions of others and be able to have that empathy. Be a real fast learner, so they may take on things quite quickly. And this is going to be varied. So each person is very different in terms of their strengths. And what's coming up as a quite big word here is resilience. It may actually feel that your child actually does have a lot of resilience. We've got that word quite a few times actually. Hyperfocus, so they can really focus on certain aspects, and high energy, that can be a superpower. I really like that word, thinking about kind of the superpowers that people have, and what they are for your child. Excellent reader, they may be really imaginative, creative, we've got, loves animals. Yeah, so there may be kind of a really focused interest. Someone's then maths and dinosaurs, kindness, thirst for knowledge, they may be really, really curious, driven, hardworking. Got creative that's coming up, imaginative play. Wow, there's so many things, so many strengths that you're holding in mind. Loving, loyal, we've got, calming, passionate. When they like something, they give it their all, drawing. So yeah, I'm sure that everyone here can kind of think of relative strengths that your young people do have. And it's really important to keep those in mind as well, and how we can kind of focus in on those strengths a little bit more. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Okay. So just kind of linking back to the brain house, and that analogy we used at the start. So what might be different for neurodivergent children in terms of how that upstairs and downstairs brain is working? So we do know that neurodivergent children and teenagers are more likely to kind of flip their lids more often than perhaps neurotypical young people, or they may find it a bit more tricky to bring that thinking brain back online when they do flip their lid, so to speak. So why might this be? I've got a few different reasons up on the screen now. So I guess one of the important things to note is around sensory input and processing that differently. So they may be very sensitive to certain senses, whether that's noise, sight, smells, touch. So sometimes that can feel really overwhelming and actually kind of create that fight, flight, or freeze response for your child. Or it may be that they need more of that input to be able to feel regulated. They may experience emotions more deeply, and need that co-regulation from others. So this can actually make it really hard sometimes to keep that thinking brain back online. They may need more help in understanding those feelings that they're having, as well as regulating them and, as someone said, communicating them as well. So, for example, for an autistic child, they may not know what they're feeling, so that emotional literacy is not there as much as in a neurotypical child, for example. And that means that those emotions can be much more powerful, because when you don't know how to make sense of them, it makes it much harder to know what to do with them. And again, they're much more vulnerable to that upstairs brain kind of going offline and the emotions feeling quite overwhelming. Also, sadly, neurodivergent children are more likely to experience some negative events in their environment, and your comments have touched on some of this as well. So things like bullying, negative comments from peers, finding lessons hard, just experience of maybe not always feeling like they fit in, and there being a bit of a mismatch between their needs and the environment. So I guess that means there's more likelihood of those big emotions coming up. And as we've been talking about within this workshop, they do have those kind of executive function differences, and that can make it a lot more tricky to connect the upstairs and downstairs brain as well. So things like acting on impulses. So there's lots of kind of understandable reasons why it may be kind of more tricky, and that lid can flip, and the upstairs brain goes offline. So you may have already heard of the kind of iceberg analogy, and essentially what we see on the surface level in terms of behaviour is actually only a really small part of the story. And underneath the surface, there may be so much more going on that we don't actually understand. So this is just an example, a really simple example of what we may be seeing on the surface level for maybe a neurodivergent child. So maybe things like the school keeps saying that they're not completing homework, maybe they're not turning up for school on time, maybe they're appearing quite withdrawn, staying in their room a lot, not really communicating to people, perhaps seeing kind of lack of motivation, or that may be a comment that teachers have made. Maybe they seem quite tearful, trying to avoid school. not able to kind of go to school fully. It may be that they're appearing kind of irritable, maybe kind of quite short with people, shouting perhaps. Maybe they're kind of seeming fine on the surface, but are actually doing a lot of masking. So there's all different types of behaviours that you may kind of see at the surface level. But what actually is really important is to understand what's going on underneath. So if we look at the left-hand slide of the comments in yellow on this slide, there could be lots going on. So these are just kind of guesses about what may be going on underneath. So it may be that some children are feeling misunderstood, and maybe that they have kind of a sense of difference to other people. There may be lots of big emotions going on, whether that's anger, stress, anxiety, feeling quite overwhelmed or hopeless with that. It may be that they're experiencing negative things like being bullied. It may be that they've got some kind of internal symptoms going on, like pain or hunger, tiredness, sensory overload. So there's all sorts of things that could kind of help explain those behaviours. But actually, if we also look at the right-hand side, there's lots of kind of cognitive things that we've just been talking about that may be explaining that behaviour. So things like really struggling to inhibit, struggling to remain focused, getting easily distracted, forgetting information, not being able to plan ahead or organise, and those needs that they have not being supported in their environment. So I guess what we really want to convey with this image is that what we see on the surface level in terms of behaviour is kind of a really small part. And actually, we need to really start looking at what's going on underneath that behaviour. And cognitive differences experienced may be a really important part of that picture for your child. So it's just kind of putting all that information together and thinking about what those cognitive differences may be for your child, and what kind of things they may be contributing to. So there is substantial research evidence that neurodivergent people are more likely to have difficulties around executive functioning. So we've kind of already gone through some of what those may be. But generally, both in ADHD and autism, the research shows that there are kind of similar executive function differences that are occurring, although certain ones may be more pronounced. So in particular, in terms of a summary of some of this, those differences of attention. So of course, attention is a key part of ADHD. Flexibility, so that means flexibility of thought, so there can sometimes be more kind of fixed or rigid thinking, but also behaviour, so kind of really needing routines and rituals perhaps. In terms of working memory, so difficulty keeping information in mind. Processing speed, as someone's mentioned this already, but sometimes it can be harder, and people just need more time to make sense of information. So they may be slightly slower in processing that and being able to respond to it. And also response inhibition, so finding it harder to control impulses. Unfortunately, sometimes we do hear that there can be a bit of a narrative around students being labelled as lazy, but we know that that's not the case. What we know is that actually neurodivergent children do have brain differences. And actually, as adults, our role is to kind of support them, and it's a kind of shared responsibility to support those cognitive needs. Also, just to highlight here that these patterns that we've talked about, they are common, but it doesn't mean that they're universal in everyone. So everyone's kind of cognitive profile as such will be different within that neurodivergent population. And as we've already highlighted, they can also show lots of strengths. So it was really nice to hear all about the different strengths that your children have. That could be things like creativity, imagination, focus, visual thinking, empathy to others. So really important to hold those in mind as well. Okay, so that's the first half of the presentation, just kind of going through some of that information. I'm going to hand over to Emmy, who's going to talk you through kind of supporting your child with those executive functions.
Great, thank you, Hope. And before I start that, I just want to say we're going to talk through quite a lot of different strategy suggestions, and you might relate more to some than others. I'm also mindful we've got quite a difference in age ranges of your children that you're kind of holding in mind today. So you might also find some more applicable than others, or you might want to think about adapting some that you feel would be really good, but maybe need to be tweaked to sort of meet the age of your young person. So I just wanted to sort of say that before we start, but hopefully you'll find some strategies helpful to try out, or you might have tried some already and you might build on those. So just before I start that, just a little reminder about the areas we're going to cover that fit under executive functioning. So we'll try and address most of those. The one we won't cover this afternoon is emotional control, because we do tend to cover that in some of our other workshops. So some of our anxiety or low mood workshops, you'll kind of find some strategies around that one particularly. So, and just as a reminder, children may not always access these skills in the moment of stress, but that doesn't mean they're not desperately trying. So we know that sometimes children and young people find it really difficult, but actually, and they might appear lazy to others, but actually they're trying really, really hard under the surface. So we want you to hold that in mind throughout, and I might probably refer to that a few times as we go. Now, I'm going to start us off in a maybe slightly strange place, but what I'd like you to sort of think about is, what skills do you need to play Monopoly? So think about the different brain skills we've talked about already today, or you might think of other skills needed to as well that we haven't talked about. Yeah, thinking ahead, turn taking, wonderful, brilliant, planning, patience, yeah, numeracy, decision making. Wow, you're going to do my job for me here. So thinking about numbers, reading, seeing the bigger picture, yeah, patience, focus, numeracy, yeah, empathy, decision making, memory, so holding kind of in mind some of those instructions or the rules of the game. Um, Patience, yeah, so turn taking, and that can be really hard if you find it hard to manage your impulse. You want to kind of do what you want to do, or you find it really hard when somebody else sort of buys the kind of the item that you want in Monopoly. Yeah, so strategy, planning, patience, turn taking, quite big sort of key areas, aren't they? And so you might kind of sort of make decisions on whether to buy a property, for example, or bide your time and save your money. Or you might do things like, how do you keep on track of what other players are doing? So that's part of the strategy of the game. Waiting your turn, or maybe not spending all your money at once. So it's quite easy to spend all your money in Monopoly, quite literally, isn't it? So it might also be hard to manage your emotions. So try not to get too frustrated, because the person next to you has bought the property that you really wanted to buy to kind of try and win the game. Calculating, so working out your money. Somebody's mentioned reading. So there's lots of cheating. So he's put cheating. I like that. So I'm not quite sure. So Monopoly is literally quite ruthless too. So there are lots and lots of different skills involved, including motor coordination as well. So throwing the dice, counting your money, picking up the cards. So there are so many skills involved in just playing a game like Monopoly. And some of you will love Monopoly, and some of you won't like Monopoly. So just wanted to start thinking about the skills that we use in games. So, and I guess what we're trying to say is, actually games can be a really powerful way and an effective and fun way to help your child develop some of those executive functioning skills. And I guess the game you choose might be up to you, because if you're picking a game that your child doesn't like, that might not work so well. So practicing skills through playing a game is likely to be more engaging, less challenging than asking your child to practice some of those skills in a much more formalized way. So this can be fun if your child likes games or is willing to interact in those. So this is relevant for children of all ages, and is a nice way of spending time together as a family too. It's also a nice way to break the intensity of the school week and keep children engaged. So think about where games could be incorporated more into kind of home life, really, particularly on a wet day. It may be really good when you can't maybe get out because it's pouring down outside. It's about being a little bit creative. Maybe for younger children, you might think about things like snakes and ladders, or puzzles, or simple card games like Uno or Snap. Many teenagers also still like Uno, just to say, and adults alike. And I guess what you're teaching your children or young people is it's about teaching paying attention, waiting your turn, emotional control, and inhibiting impulses. So a fun memory game is laying out a series of objects, asking your child to look at them all and trying to remember what's where, then placing a towel over the objects and removing one object out of their view, and then revealing the objects and asking them which one you've removed. So you can do lots of fun things. You don't even have to have a game at home. You can just take items from around your house and be just a little bit creative and have a bit of fun. For older children and teenagers, games like Monopoly or Cluedo or Trivial Pursuit are great. A good mix of executive functioning skills and some high level planning and logic. They're quite classic games, I guess. So you might also think about other things that are out there that maybe your young person really fancies the idea around playing or engaging in. So be just really a little bit creative, but it can be a really nice time to spend time as a family and teaching those skills at the same time. So my next question is, what kind of things do you try to do and to help direct their focus and attention? So what do you do to either keep them on track or get things back on track in this area? Because this can be really tough. Oh, I think this might be a reveal one, Hope. So there's lots of things coming through I can see on my screen, but not on the general screen, Hope. Wonder whether we can press reveal.
I don't know. I'll just leave it a few minutes more in case it.
Okay, no worries. I can just see my screen going very fast on my
Yeah.
right-hand side, but I can't read them quite in that size very well. So some people have talked a bit about exercise, talking about it, sitting with them, providing movement breaks, nature walks, leaving a note, using an orchard toy. Yeah, there's quite a few people talking about going for walks. Um, okay, so so going for walks is really popular on here. A stress ball, so maybe like a fidget toy, crunchy or cold snacks, having a small break during homeworks. Okay, great. Okay, shift to an environment with less distractions. Brilliant. Prompting, reminding how are you getting on, sending them out on the trampoline, fidget. So yeah, giving mu breaks, music, having food, snacks. So it seems to be a bit of a theme around food, kind of movement, music, cuddle the pet. I like that. So taking some deep breaths, physical activity again. Um, yeah, maybe from jumping to dancing, etc. in the house, playing games, baking, bike riding, regular snacks are always a winner. So that's really helpful. It might be really helpful for other people in the room to hear some of these suggestions if they don't use them already. Music, dancing. Okay, I'm going to move us on. You can still add to that Slido if you like, but I'm just conscious of time a little bit. So the next slide is about how do we redirect? And when we talk about redirecting, we're talking about what helps them to kind of keep their attention and focus. The strategies on this slide are taken from a book by, I can't quite say her name, Paola Dable, and I'll talk us through some of those. So the first suggestion is around using a timer to give yourself regular stopping points whilst working. So for example, that might mean that you set a timer for 10 minutes and then have 5-minute break. And you might literally use a timer so the young person can see when the next thing's going to happen or how long they've got left on something, because it might be really hard to keep that focus going, but knowing there's a minute to go, they might just be able to push themselves through that minute. So set a timer for breaks. Um, the book itself mentions reward breaks, but it could also be things like movement breaks and sensory breaks. A lot of you spoke about movement being really helpful with your young person. So that is also one of the options. Listening to focus music. Somebody mentioned music earlier in that last Slido. Now, what this book suggests is using things like classical music. Some young people might not like that. White noise, ocean waves. So basically, the suggestion is music without lyrics. So it might be that you have that on in the background because they find that really soothing, calming, and keeps them focused. And it might be that your young person finds it easier to stand up to work. So, because some things you can do if you're stood up, if you're not having to sit and write. Um, Visual aids, or sticky notes to remind you about important tasks. Somebody mentioned that on the Slido as well, which is lovely. Try and remove distractions. So turn off notifications, put your phone away, clear your desk. When I supported the ADHD team many years ago, one of the suggestions for school would be using, or for homework at home, using a coloured piece of card to focus their attention on what they were needing to do and putting the work they needed to do on that coloured piece of card, which some people really liked. Healthy snacks, especially those high in protein, because it avoids sort of the focus killing blood sugar spikes and by avoiding sort of carbs and sugars. Lots of you talked about actually the snacks being the key to getting your young person through some things. So, and the other suggestion on the slide is about noise cancelling headphones. So maybe blocking out any sounds that might be around. So if your young person's really prone to being distracted because there's a noise, and sometimes we live in really busy households where that's really hard if we've got multiple siblings. So noise cancelling headphones can also help to try and keep the focus going. Okay, now this Paula Moraine, in her book called Autism and Executive Function, has included what she calls executive function maps for a whole variety of aspects like attention, memory, organization, planning, inhibition and initiative, flexibility, control of behavior and emotion, and goal setting. So she has a whole load of different areas covered in her book. And the bit I quite liked about her book was this executive function map. Now, the principle of this, and you can apply this to any kind of situation where it involves executive function challenges. So the principle is around identifying the strengths and weaknesses in that particular area. So what's the challenge and what's actually what they're really good at as well. Learning about goals. So what's your intention or agenda? Accommodations, how should your approach be structured? What support should be provided? And strategies or approaches. So what strategies will be used to realize your learning goals? So, and I've just included an example of that on the screen for you. Now, when we say supporting attention, it isn't about asking your child to try harder. So to be really clear, when we're putting strategies in, it's not about saying you must try harder. It's about just creating conditions where actually we're enabling them to focus and feel set, but they have to feel safe and it has to feel doable. So if we're giving them unrealistic goals, it's going to give a sense of not being able to achieve it and a sense of failure. So this has to be really realistic and using their strengths and acknowledging their weaknesses, but putting steps in place that support rather than challenge too much. So another slide, just to think about what helps your child with planning and organising. So before we sort of give you some ideas around this, we just want to hear from you. So plenty of warning, yeah, because you'll hold lots of wealth of knowledge in this room. Timers, yeah, advance notice, tick lists, now and next boards at school, step-by-step instructions. They feel like they feel part of the planning making, yeah. Time to process, visual timetables, not doing things too far in advance, yeah. Whiteboard with information, lists, doing it first thing in the morning, yeah. I guess that's what knowing whether your child is a morning person or a late afternoon person. Breakdown of what is expected. Post-it notes next to the front door. Weekly planner board. Post-it notes. Yeah, telling them in advance about exciting activities like going out. Now, your child might be different. Some of your children might prefer to know quite early, whereas for some of your young people, they might prefer not to know too far in advance. Routines. Yeah, giving visual examples. Bribery. Okay. Same structure or order of tasks, so they learn routine, like for example, around brushing teeth and then getting dressed, except yeah, reward systems. Okay, I'll leave you to type. So there's a lot around routine and knowing things in advance on in terms of the sort of themes of what you're describing, and a promise of snacks. I like it. Okay, so if we think about supporting, planning, and organizing, there are lots of different ideas that we may have already been covered, you might have already tried, and you've talked about routines already. So for many neurodivergent people, feeling organized starts with having routines, doing certain things in the same way every time, so they feel in control and a sense of calm. So, a colleague of mine watched Love on the Spectrum recently, and the young autistic man described that when his routine is disrupted or it kind of goes wrong for him, that's how he describes it, it feels like chaos. And if you think about it, if you feel really overwhelmed and life feels very chaotic, it can be really hard to manage that for all of us, really. And what we then try and do is we try and put a routine or a plan in place for it. So, making plans are often best when you're feeling calm. So it's really hard to do when you're feeling in that chaos state or feeling really overwhelmed. So, and as Hope described, sort of our executive functioning works best when we are calm and regulated, when our upstairs and downstairs brain are working well together. So I won't go over that too much because Hope's really described that very beautifully already today. But the principle is if the emotions are taking over, then it makes it really difficult for us to do that planning, problem solving, and organizing really at the end of the day. So it's really important that we think about how do we help your young person to feel calm before trying to use that upstairs part of the brain. It might help to make sure that your child has recently had some food and water. So your strategy around feeding your children, making sure they've got those snacks is actually not such a bad idea because it means, their blood sugar levels are often more stable before trying to sort of do a challenging task or doing that planning. And it's also really important to be mindful about sleep. Have they had enough sleep the night before and adjusting plans accordingly. So if they've had very little sleep, actually, it can be so hard to concentrate and focus because you are so tired. And I guess it's just thinking about yourself when you've not had sleep. What's that like when you're asked to really focus and do some of those tasks you're asking to do your children to do? So just kind of adjust accordingly to thinking where's your child at on that day as well. Maybe using a checklist can help to simplify complex tasks. So, getting ready for school, understanding steps involved with homework tasks, or even packing for going away somewhere. In one of our workshops around parental stress, we talk a lot about the kind of build up of going to school and the many, many tasks involved and how stressful the many tasks can be. So it might be kind of worth looking back at that one if you want to look at that a little bit more. Using a calendar or a planner. Many of us use planners all the time if we're at work and we're juggling things. It's working out when can I meet with somebody to do a certain task, maybe. So visual planners can be great way to support children in some of those skills. Using the same format for weekends and holidays can be great, but can be quite difficult to do if your routines are quite different and your kids stay up later or. But have a think about whether that would make a difference to your young person. But it can also help with the transition to and from school. Setting reminders. So maybe thinking about, you know, setting reminders on your phone or a tablet if you've got one of those. So most phones and tablets have reminder functions. And if your child doesn't have one of their own, because they're maybe too young or, you don't approve of them having a phone, whatever it might be, then set reminders on your own phone maybe and show them the reminder pop up. Or if they're in schools, maybe they can use a whiteboard or other ways to remind a young person of important things they have to remember. So there are multiple ways of doing that without necessarily using technology if you don't have that to hand. So task initiation, I'm going to move on to if that's okay. So your child might have difficulty initiating or starting a task. Some of you spoke about that in the Slidos earlier. Getting ready for school in the morning is a common example from home. So your child might be reluctant to get ready for school, but they might also find it really overwhelming because there are so many things they need to do to get ready. It's hard to know how to start that. And I've just spoken a little bit about on the parental stress workshop, we literally mapped out the potential steps, and I found it really overwhelming to look at. And I think we sometimes underestimate how many steps are involved in that particular sort of process. Um, so so they might be overwhelmed, and there's so many things they need to do to get ready. It's hard to know how to start that. Or initiating homework tasks is another really good example from a lot of homes. A common example is school might be initiating a task in the classroom, or they might sort of have a change in the school day. And I guess sort of making that initiation can be really tough sometimes. So there are key things that can support children in their key environments with task initiation. And those include starting with the smallest or easiest step. And that might not be the logical first step. So you might go, they should be starting here, but that might not be the right place for your young person to start. So think about the smallest and the easiest step, even if that's in a sequence already, rather than the starting point, the most logical first step. Start doing and then shift momentum to the avoided task. So, start with getting them doing something before you move to the more difficult tasks. And maybe turn the task into a bit of a game if you can. And sometimes we see lots of parents, and I certainly have done it too, turning sort of tasks into a game to get my children to do things. And in essence, it really creates a bit of an illusion of urgency. So you might use a timer, or you kind of might go, come on, 1, 2, 3, go. And you kind of sort of building that kind of motivation and that kind of turning it into a bit of a playful challenge or kind of motivator. But remember, it is only an illusion, so it's important to allow extra time to do things for neurodivergent children. We live in a really busy and fast-paced culture, and it can be really hard because you might kind of go, right, I've got 5 minutes to do this thing with my child, and I need them to kind of do this in 5 minutes. But allowing extra time and maybe using some of those playful illusionary strategies to kind of create urgency when there isn't would be better than kind of literally putting the pressure on because you've just got 5 minutes because life gets incredibly busy and that's part of the challenge sometimes for us. So maybe you can use timers, but equally some of those strategies, so using a timer can also be a trigger for some young people. So this is kind of the point where it's about you knowing your child best. So are some of those strategies encouraging and playful and they'll like those, or actually are those going to be more of a trigger? And do you need to kind of adjust that approach maybe? So make space for sensation seeking. So do the task standing, maybe use fidget toys, heated wheat bags, weighted cushions. So think about different ways that you can support them in feeling more comfortable or managing some of those kind of tasks by having something they feel comfortable with. Um, okay. Okay, I'm going to move us on to prioritizing. So I guess I'm coming back to a timer again here. So if your child has something complex they need to plan, or they're feeling overwhelmed with a task and not sure how to prioritize, try some of these steps. So set a timer if they're not triggered by timers, as I've just said, and write freely maybe just for 3 minutes because they might hold so much information in their heads. And if they're a happy writer, so they're quite happy to write things down, it might just be that you let them freely kind of express themselves for 3 minutes by writing it down or vocalizing it. And this is designed to help them kind of get that jumble of thoughts, ideas, and worries on a page. So it's just getting it out in the first place. And then it might be that you write down the steps needed to complete the task. And you might cut out each step and physically order the tasks in front of you. So, and that you might consider what's the most urgent on that list? What's the most important on that list? What will my energy levels and mood permit me to do right now? So actually, I might not be able to do all of those tasks. I might need to do some of that for 10 minutes, then have a movement break and come back to it. So think about what can the energy levels manage at that point and what's actually within your child's control. So it might be you cut out or ignore steps, think that there are that, some of it might be out of their control. So some of it they might not be able to manage. So enable them to kind of do things that they feel they can manage and that you feel they can manage. So this is about supporting them to prioritize what to focus on, maybe, and helping them find ways to do that. So it might be that you chunk for them or you kind of do it together and you show them kind of ways of sort of putting things in an order together. Okay, so what helps your child with their memory? So before we give you some of those ideas, again, we want to hear about what kind of things do you try and do already? Okay, lists, yeah, routine. Sing rhymes, wonderful example. Repetition, yeah. Setting a routine, yeah, routine. Constant reminding, pictures, yeah. Repeat the steps verbally, yeah. Post-it notes, visual reminders. Yeah, lots around routines and checklists. Single tasks and steps. Writing things down, mind maps, yeah, great idea. Yeah. Reminders, although can seem like nagging, I agree. Sometimes that can feel really tricky. Encourage when he remembers. Alarms, yeah. She doesn't forget anything that she has asked for, yeah. But sometimes maybe forgets what you've asked for. Using acronyms, poetry to remember, lovely. Ask them to retell the same thing several times until clearer and they get more clarity as well. Yeah, great. Lovely examples. So there's a lot about routines, a lot around reminders in terms of helping your child with memory, and a lot about repetition as well. Yeah, asking clear, simple questions. So something about the use of language. Use the important words last. Okay, so maybe how you kind of structure your sentence or your request. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to take us on to supporting memory in that case. So these next few slides are based on the work of Professor Joni Holmes at the University of East Anglia, who is an expert in working memory problems in children. Now, I want to highlight that memory difference often relate to how information is received and retrieved, not how hard the child is trying. So we might have differences about how we best receive information and retrieve it. So that's worth holding in mind, and we're not all the same on that. So this is kind of worth holding in mind. So reducing the amount of information to be remembered is a really good first step. So just like if you're trying to follow a recipe, try giving your child instructions or tasks one at a time. So I don't generally look at a nice recipe and kind of remember all the steps in one go. I might look at the ingredients and try and remember what I need and get them out one at a time, maybe, or maybe two at a time, depending what you can manage. So think about this a little bit like following a recipe. So instead of saying, right, you've finished breakfast, so go upstairs, get dressed, brush your teeth, and bring your books down from your bedroom, I often add, go and get your coat, put your shoes on, we'll go out the door. Um, it's not going to happen often. So it's really hard to hold on to all of that information if that's something you find more challenging. So maybe start with simply saying, it's time to get dressed. And even that might be quite hard. So work out where your young person's at in terms of what they can manage. Keep your language really clear and direct about exactly what they need to remember. So some of you have spoken on that on the last slide already. So try to avoid long sentences if you can. So literally give them one thing at a time. And then maybe think about break things down into small steps is helpful to some. It reduces the amount of information to be stored, so we don't have to take on so much information and the amount of processing needed in their brain. So some of you have spoken about it takes your child a little bit longer to process some information. So try not to overwhelm them too much with that information. It also gives the opportunity for little wins and successes along the way. And that's really important. If we feel we've achieved something and we can do, it's better than if we have that sense of, I can't manage that. So if, for example, when getting ready in the morning for school, you break the task down into small, simple steps, and depending on the age of your young person, it might be that you give them a high five for each one of those steps. In my household, we used to do high tens for special achievements. So it might be if they manage all of those steps, you do that at the end of it. But think about the appropriateness of your child's age, of course, along the way. But, what we want to try and achieve is that sense of achievement in your child. So breakfast is done, great. Time to go upstairs, great. They've managed to get upstairs. Pajamas off, uniform on. Great, they've done it. So brush your teeth. Great, another sense of achievement. Get your books. Great, they've done that as well. So they're likely to kind of get more feedback from you if you're kind of giving one by one instructions and have that sense of achievement than if you're going, go and get breakfast, go upstairs, get out of your pajamas, get dressed, brush your teeth, and get your books and get out the door. If you give it all in one chunk, it might be far too overwhelming for some of your children. You may well need to repeat instructions as well, or information you've given your child to help them remember. Try not to get too frustrated with repeating information and try and really keep calm. I know that can be really hard, especially when we're in busy environments or busy and we need to get out the door and we've got other children we're trying to get ready to. It's incredibly difficult in reality sometimes. But you remember your child's brain is genuinely really struggling to hold that information in mind, and they might not be able to do it first time either. So that's okay. So hold in mind that this can be a genuine challenge, and they might not be trying to be awkward. So there's a few other strategies, and again, I would say you can use these strategies. You can use all of these strategies, but design them slightly differently depending on your child's age. So using memory aids and visuals can be great. So visual timetables, and the example here you can see on the screen in the pictures is an example of a visual timetable, but you can do it using symbols. You can just use words. You can also use photographs, so it becomes a real thing. So you might kind of have fun creating a visual timetable with your young person as well, but do it in a way that appeals to your young person. And wall charts for regular tasks, maybe voice recordings for instructions. So some people might prefer to kind of have a little voice recording where you're reminding them of the different steps they have to do, or setting reminders and timers can also be really helpful. How many of us set reminders to maybe get up or take to do certain tasks in the day because we have to do them at certain times of the day? Actually, most of us use some of these um, sort of strategies to help us, whether we struggle with executive functioning or not. So, it's about supporting them understanding that those strategies aren't totally unusual things to do, but can just be really useful to incorporate to help us. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about supporting memory, and this is where some of you have already talked a bit about rehearsal. So you might have already used some of these. So rehearsal, we know repetition can help when a young person feels safe, supported, and engaged. So rehearsing information that needs to be remembered either out loud or in our head makes it more likely we will remember it. So how many of us go to the shop maybe and go, right, I need to get the bread, the butter, and the milk, and I need some apples as well. And we'll worry about forgetting one of those maybe. So we might kind of rehearse that list or we might write it down even. So it can be helpful to ask your child to repeat back to you what they've been asked to remember. For example, if you tell them you're going to pick them up from the park by the bike sheds at 6 o'clock, you might want to think about asking them, tell me when and where I'm picking you up later. Now, rehearsing that information helps them to remember and also helps you check that they have listened to and made sense of what you've told them. So they're sort of small changes you might make if you're not doing those already. Or you might create stories from the to be remembered information. So you might have information to remember, and you might generate a story to help them remember. Or you might use rhymes or mnemonics. Using rhymes is a nice way of making information more memorable. So somebody in the slide has mentioned that earlier. So, for example, remember the 5th of November, just as an example. Well, mnemonics just refer to language strategies used to help with memory, such as setting information you need to remember to a memorable tune like ABC or Happy Birthday. It could also be having memorable word as an acronym, or each letter of the word starts on a piece of the information. So, for example, you may have heard of Richard of York gave battle in vain, which represents the colours of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. So those are just kind of some ways of helping your child or yourself even to remember some of that information that can be hard to hold on to. So working memory training is available out there, but research shows that this doesn't seem to improve real life kind of aspects like reading, maths, or behavior. So, um, so those are some of our suggestions around supporting memories. Um, and this is a really important strategy, scaffolding. So it's a teaching method. This is a general skill which can support executive functioning and learning. So if you think in construction, scaffolding on a building is a temporary structure that supports a work crew to be able to do their work and access the materials they need. So it's just there for a short period of time, doesn't stay up forever. And once the job is done, it's taken down and the building can stand on its own. And I guess that's a really nice way of holding on to the idea of scaffolding skills in your children. So, scaffolding with children's learning is a similar idea. It's a temporary supportive teaching method to help children learn a skill and independence. So, scaffolding is not about just telling a child how to do something. It means things like modeling the skill yourself for the child, asking open questions such as, what might help us to do this? So, thinking together about it, encouraging thinking out loud. What do you think we should do? Giving hints and praise along the way. So, you're kind of really trying to problem solve that together and trying to support them in building that skill. If your child's struggling to come up with a response or an idea, give a range of possible answers, reduce the demands on their memory, and give them more likelihood of success. So if you feel they're going to really struggle it, scale it back a little bit. Um, so scaffolding works well for tasks which are just above your child's current ability. So don't put it too far out of reach. You're kind of just pushing them that little bit to that next level. So if the task is much too advanced for them, they're not going to have enough existing knowledge or skills and not enough success out of that. So scaffolding basically means offering just enough to support to succeed and adjusting based on what the child needs, not what we expect. So we've put a bit of a link about scaffolding. I think we'll put that in our resources slide, so you can kind of have a look at more information on that. Okay, so I guess kind of one of the things that we've talked about earlier, some people have talked about actually the knock-on effect um, on self-esteem, confidence. Somebody talked about your child being bullied as a consequence. So unfortunately, there can be such a knock-on effect on young people when executive functioning is a challenge for them. So we know that for all of us, the experience of repeated failure can have a huge impact on our confidence. So if your child has got that kind of repeated sense they can't do things in school maybe or can't manage things, that's going to potentially have a big impact on how they feel about themselves and their confidence, their self-esteem. And sadly, many neurodivergent children and young people may have experienced repeated failure due to others not understanding or supporting their differences, or for getting into trouble for them. So not being able to sit still or interrupting. So maybe not feeling understood. And this can lead them to feeling bad about themselves and having low confidence, especially when approaching new or challenging tasks. Children with low confidence due to their past experiences and those who struggle in the areas of learning because of difficulties with memory, concentration, organization, and understanding others' point of view can repeatedly be exposed to that sense of failure in their life. And this can really impact self-esteem and that sense of self and further reduce their kind of willingness or ability to kind of engage in new skills and developing new skills. So how can we support them? We can support our young people build a growth mindset through providing them with the opportunities to experience success. So we've already talked a lot about that praise, maybe in the memory kind of part when we talked about give them one step at a time. So it supports them to reframe failure as an opportunity for success and to learn and grow. So resilience is the experience of overcoming difficult things and being successful, not having that sense of repeated failure. So this starts with adults supporting children through encouraging to be brave, to try new things, even if that's really hard, and to try again if they have struggled the first time. You know, we don't generally achieve a new skill the first time we try it. And I guess this is about us modeling that and saying, it's okay, I'm here to support you with that. So how do we scaffold them and build their confidence in this space? Well, how can we use their strengths to support them? You've talked about beautiful strengths in your children today. How can we use their special interests to motivate them? So, can we do it in a theme around something they're interested in, maybe? Ask them what their favorite character would do in a situation or what they might say to motivate them. Consider with each individual child how how can we support them to feel more positive about their strengths and use them to support with these things. See them as superpowers rather than something getting them into trouble. So this is about how do we build as many opportunities as possible in a neurodivergent child's day for them to succeed and overcome difficulties. Doesn't matter how small they seem, doesn't matter at all. It can be small tasks at home linked to the things they enjoy or tasks within the classroom environment. So, for example, helping to hand out books, pens, to help them to start to develop the skills they need. So, as well as creating opportunities for experiencing success within a child's day and scaffolding them to support them to achieve. It's important to celebrate their success and strengths. So, focus on this process, um, not to overcome you've worked really hard, for example, or I can see how much effort you've put into this. This will help your child to feel more confident in trying new things. So, this is about giving them that support and giving them that feedback to build them up a little bit. Right. Okay, I'm going to move us on to a Slido question next. And it's what kind of things do you or school do to celebrate success? So we talked a lot about building our children up here in the last few slides and thinking about breaking things down, how we can make it easier to scaffold. We've talked about lots of different examples, but what kind of things do you or school do to celebrate success? And really consider even small successes. Yeah, praise, reward, certificates at school. Yeah, allow them to pick dinner. Love it. Okay, rewards, treats, cake. Tell them how proud I am of them. Gold award at school, dojo points at school, display of artwork. Yeah, school gives merit points or awards, movie choice. Yeah, I love that. So thank you when does something asked to do. Yeah, star of the week at school. So there's lots of initiatives at school, isn't there, around sort of acknowledging that. Display of their work around the house. Yeah, trips out, go somewhere of their choice, plan a holiday, lots of praise and small rewards at home. Yeah, okay, choose a meal, normally curry, love it. Spend extra time doing something they like, usually a game with me of some sorts. Yeah, so praise, special one-on-one time, dojo points at school and certificates, nice dinner and fun movie to celebrate, meals out, football cards. Yeah, lots of different things here. Yeah, school gives positive referrals and phone home when success has been achieved. Okay. Now, that can also be stressful seeing school phone if you are used to many calls where you get calls about challenges. So it's quite nice to get that call when it's different. School does staff the week, but when they don't get, it's hard. Yeah, that is hard when you don't get that reward. Spending more time with neurodivergent friends. Okay, so lots of lovely examples. So positive affirmations can help you feel better about yourselves. If we think about ourselves, we probably all really like a bit of that. And it helps you to refocus and motivate yourself. So if somebody says something nice to me about something I've done really well at work, I feel really motivated. I want to do more. I want to try harder, and I want to achieve. So Paolo Dable talks about those positive affirmations helping us in ourselves, helping us to refocus and motivate ourselves, and help you see things in a more optimistic and positive way. So it kind of helps us to reframe a little bit. So repeat them every day, yeah, especially when you are feeling discouraged or stuck on a task. So, when you're kind of trying to achieve a new skill, how hard can that sometimes be? You can be really determined, but it can be hard to keep that motivation going if you're struggling with it. So maybe put them where you can see them. Somebody talked lots about post-it notes earlier. Maybe put some of those positive affirmations around. Um, Maybe try and spot some negative self-talk and try and replace it with positive affirmations or growth mindset statements, which we'll look at on our next slide. So affirmations may feel hard to do at first, but model them out loud and connect them to what your child loves and values. So you know your child best. Think about what would they value, and it has to be genuine. I think that's also really important. Just making up positive affirmations when it doesn't feel like quite hits a genuine mark can be really hard. So this is about you practicing and maybe trying to find a way that works for you and your young person. Okay, so these are just examples of refocusing your mindset. So many of you might have heard about growth mindset, and growth includes resting, resetting, and starting again. So every little small step matters. So a fixed mindset might be about I can't do it. So I'll give an example. I've always gone through the world and said I can't do a Rubik's Cube. So I've definitely gone with I can't do it. Um, Now, fixed mindset might also include I'm not good enough. I'm a failure. I might have failed at this Rubik's Cube. I'm not good at this. This is too hard. So, and I can genuinely say that used to be some of my thinking around a Rubik's Cube until I met somebody who taught me about growth mindset many years ago. And now I have this kind of view about me and my Rubik's Cube as I'm still learning. I'll keep trying. And actually, I can do a whole side. Brilliant. That's a great start. So it can get better with practice. I can try a different way. And actually, it's about teaching our children that mistakes are part of learning. So, it's like you can't just start with a skill and expect ourselves to do it first time. This is about growth and kind of keep going and keep trying. And it might be that you need a little bit of support, but it's holding the right mindset in your brains basically and holding on to those and encouraging our children to hold those mindsets. Okay, I'm going to try and whiz a little bit this last section because I'm mindful we're rapidly running out of time, aren't we? So this is about working together across school and home, and this can be a massive challenge for a lot of people. And Hope and I hear about this a lot in our day-to-day work. So it could be helpful to discuss with your child's school the executive function difficulties you're noticing at home, and likewise school staff to share some of those with you, and maybe thinking about sharing some of those strategies. Parents bring a deep insight into their children's experience, so schools can build on some of that. So it's important to try and work together. Or if you've got strategies around positive affirmations, kind of share some of those with school. And then you can discuss and think about things together and kind of sort of try and instill continuity and ensure kind of that sort of sameness, that kind of comfort, that safety, that familiarity for your young person. I'm going to not talk too much about the rest of this slide, and I'm going to move us on because you can come back to this if that's okay. So, and we have some kind of, we've got a slide here about advice for schools. You can share the relevant advice from today's workshop and some of these specific strategies, which you'll get at the end of when we send out the resource or you get the video as well. So they're great resources for schools. And we do a lot of work with parents of neurodivergent children. And as part of our ongoing work, we asked parents if they had any messages that they would like to share with other parents or other adults working with children, which includes advice they would give when supporting children with executive functioning. So we wanted to share some of these quotes with you. And we hope that gives you all some hope and some key important messages that you're not alone. We are going to signpost to key resources and support on our next few slides as well. Okay. So looking after your own well-being as a parent and carer feels really important. Thinking about how you're going to do this for yourself and your support system. So this is just a slide thinking about your support out there as well. So who's around you who can support you as well, so that you don't feel so alone with this journey. And we've got quite a few slides on resources. There's a few YouTube kind of aspects in there as well. We talked about what is scaffolding the YouTube clip earlier, so that's all listed on this slide.
And these are the kind of links and things we'll make sure everyone has access to. So we'll send an email follow up for all of these kind of things.
Absolutely. So yeah, and some further key resources. So these are kind of about helplines that you can access. and a few of the books we've referenced today that we've talked about in terms of the strategies. So I'm going to literally whiz through these because I'm mindful you're probably going to want to finish too. And this is a link to other kind of workshops, neurodiversity workshops that we're running and that are coming up. So you'll get those in your packs when we send them out, but have a look as well. There are also other free workshops that we run. So we've talked a little bit about anxiety. We talked about the big feelings workshop. Some of those are specific to neurodivergence and some of them are not. So there is a mixture around and available.